However, he is joining us on WebEx this afternoon. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. And are there any bill introductions? Seeing none. So Eli, did you provide me an agenda? Oh, okay. Yeah, where it says daily agenda, it should give me a hint. Okay, have you handed out the committee rules? Okay. Representative Fairchild has an amendment that he wants to make, but we're going to get through our presentations first and see if there's time left over to discuss the rules. All right, we have two presentations today. The first presentation, is actually, it looks like we have three presentations today. The State Library budget and Jennifer Light, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Light. I am the KLRD analyst who covers the State Historical Society and State Library. We're going to start with the State Library. Ray Walling, the state librarian, is in the audience and will be providing testimony after we are done. The State Library has served the state since 1855. Its mission is to provide library and information services to the executive and legislative branches of the state government and to deliver 21st century library services and resources to all Kansas residents. Page 2 begins the fiscal year 2025 budget analysis. The agency's revised fiscal year 2025 request is $7.4 million, including $5.2 million SGF with 29.5 FTE positions. You can see in figure 3 that this is a decrease in all funds of just under $67,000 or 0.9% from their approved. The Special Committee on Legislative Budget approved a budget of $7.2 million with $5.1 million SGF. Item number 1 is the SGF reappropriation. Just over $163,000 in unspent SGF monies was shifted from fiscal year 24 to 25. This is mostly for licenses for online content from various places and will be used for said licenses and for creating a new website for the agency. The LBC deleted just over $150,000, leaving reappropriations of just over $13,000. And the $150,000 reappropriation that was deleted was a reappropriation for licensing the nursing education in video and the creation of a new website for the state library. The agency's revised request does not include any supplemental requests. Item number 3 at the top of page 3 finishes the fiscal year 2025 analysis. The agency's revised request includes a decrease of just under $60,000, all in the Federal Library and Services Technology Act Fund. The total amount in the revised estimate is the same as the agency received in federal funds for the federal fiscal year 2024. There are all other adjustments of a decrease of just over $7,000, all in special revenue funds, mainly due to an anticipated decrease in travel grants and private donations. I'd be happy to stand for questions on fiscal year 25 or go ahead and move to fiscal year 26.
Does the committee have any questions on fiscal year 25? Seeing none, you may continue.
Top of page 4 begins fiscal year 2026. The agency's request for fiscal year 26 is $8 million in all funds, including $5.8 million in SGF and 29.5 FTE. This is an increase of just under $700,000 from fiscal year's 25 approved amount, or 9.6%. The Special Committee on Legislative Budget approved a budget of $7.2 million all funds with $5.1 million SGF. The major discussion point in fiscal year 2026 is the agency's enhancement, which is state grants and aids to libraries. The agency's request includes an enhancement for just under $748,000 SGF to increase both the base aid and the formula allocation for the state grants and aid for a total request of $2.6 million SGF for fiscal year 2026. This includes an increase in the base amount from $1,000 to $2,000 per library for fiscal year 2026. And an increase in the per capita amount from 30 cents per local library to 39 cents per local library. In the 2024 session, the legislature did go ahead and approve for the first time, a base amount for state grants and aid. So for fiscal year 2025, there is $1,000 for base, and then it's 30 cents per capita. Before fiscal year 2025, there was no base in the state grants and aids for libraries. So the agency requested this. The Special Committee on Legislative Budget Affairs did not include it in its base for the House Bill 2007. So if you can see on the top of page 5, it says the agency has an add, and the LBC says delete. Item number 2 is the Federal Library Services and Technology Act fund again. The agency's request includes the decrease of just under $60,000, all in the Federal Library Services and Technology Act fund, for a total of $2.1 million. And this is the same as it was in fiscal year 2025. They're just trying to hold the line steady with what they got received in the federal fiscal year 2024. All other adjustments include a decrease of just under $11,500, including an SGF increase of just under $16,400, mainly due to increases in salaries and wages due to changes in group health benefits and salaries for unclassified employees, which is partially offset by expected decreases in books and library materials. Pages 6 and 7 of this document are reference tables for you to look at. And then page 8 has more history on the state grants and aid. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
So talk to us about the relationship between the state libraries, the state library and the other libraries. How many libraries are served and how does that process work?
So there are 322 central libraries and 45 additional branch libraries across the state of Kansas. The state library in the state grants and aid fund provides funding for all of those libraries. That does not include school libraries. Those are the public libraries within counties. They also includes 7 regional library systems. So there's 322 libraries and then 7 regional library systems that receive funding through the state library. The state library does work with all of those libraries. It works on interlibrary loans with those libraries. It also works with school districts to provide the online services for databases for schools. They work hand in hand with schools for that. But as far as with the libraries across the state, when you think of like the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library, they would be getting the money from, whereas the USD 501 public library, or the USD 501 school libraries would not be receiving funding through the state grants and aid.
So when I get my property tax bill twice a year back in Saline County, I see that there's a line item for libraries. Where does that money end up going?
I would have to defer to the state librarian for a little bit more in-depth discussion on the mill levies within the different districts. But if he doesn't have a question or an answer for you today, I'd be happy to circle back with that.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions for Jennifer? We have Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought that maybe we would kind of inform the committee of what we were talking about before this committee meeting, as far as page number 1, where it says a 12.8 decrease, and that's a decrease compared to the agency's recommendation. The agency's recommendation compared to the Legislative Budget Committee for 2026. And I guess my question would just be, would it be correct that it's that from 2025 to 2026, when you're just comparing the Legislative Budget Committee's recommendations for 2025 to their recommendations for 2026, that would be somewhere around a $5,000 spending increase?
That would be correct.
Are there any other questions for this conferee? Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer, going back to what we were talking about before on, the money's going back to local libraries. What kind of effect does this have on smaller county libraries? That differential of what's been approved and what the ask is. Pretty substantial, isn't it?
So it is my understanding that the per capita amount that has been in statute for some time has always been a per capita, and so therefore, in general, when you have more people around, it would help that. So the larger population sections would be getting a larger amount from that per capita. When the base was established last year at 1,000, the state agency or the state library had requested it to be $3,000. The legislature finally decided on $1,000 at that point. The $1,000 per library does help the libraries that are in more rural areas for that reason. So when the legislature decided to increase both the per capita, it was helping more urban areas, and by adding the base, it was helping more rural areas, is my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Other questions? Chairman Howe, do you have any questions online?
Hey, Vice Chair Sanders, I do not at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that. And now we'll hear from Ray Walling, and he is the state librarian. Good afternoon and welcome to committee.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you also to Jennifer Light and the KLRD team for the important role they play in the budget process. In today's testimony, I'm going to focus on three aspects of the state agency's budget. First, the agency is requesting that the funding lapsed in Section 86A of House Bill 2007 be restored. Pursuant to 2024 Session Law, Chapter 88, Section 90A, the agency was reappropriated $150,272 to its operating expenses budget unit. These expenses were for two expenditures. This money was for two expenditures. First, Nursing Education and Video, 3rd edition, which the agency requested delegated authority on April 11th, 2024 to license statewide in perpetuity. A decision on the request was not received during fiscal year 2024. Based on the reappropriation clause, the agency requested delegated authority again on September 30th, 2024, which was granted October 8th, 2024. The vendor was paid $83,800 on October 23rd, 2024, and the agency was notified just January 12th, 2025 that the funding was lapsed, despite the agency having already spent the funding. The second expense was requested as part of a procurement negotiating committee to be formed an RFP process for an agency website contract. This was sent in on September 26, 2023. While the procurement and negotiating committee recommended that a contract be established, agreeable terms could not be reached with the selected vendor. The agency requested a new procurement negotiating committee be formed and RFP be posted September 17, 2024. As previously mentioned, the agency was notified January 12th, 2025 that the funding was lapsed despite the RFP process already being underway. Second, the agency is requesting that its enhancement request of $747,649 for state aid to libraries be added to line 24, page 172 of House Bill 2007. The agency's enhancement request was included in the governor's budget. Pursuant to KSA 752561, the state librarian's annual budget includes an estimate of the needed amount of grant and aid to libraries based on the requests by libraries and amounts reasonably available for such purposes. Considering feedback from members of the Senate Higher Education Budget Subcommittee last session, this enhancement represents another step toward addressing the significantly higher per capita need for libraries serving our rural communities, addressing disparity between identified library need per capita and current year appropriations for the per capita formula, and bringing the fiscal year 2026 appropriation closer to the fiscal year 2000 appropriation level. Third, the agency received a request to submit a reduced resource package of 7.5% of its SGF appropriations. A detailed written proposal has been provided, which I will provide a brief overview of. The agency is proposing ending its contract for statewide databases with ProQuest LLC. The contract includes 4 databases: Nursing and Allied Health Premium, US Newsstream, Heritage Quest, and Fold 3. In looking at the big picture, 99% of the agency's budget is in 3 major account codes, including aid to local units that provide funding that supports operations in libraries in each of your districts. The agency is not proposing cuts to this account code since funding remains, as noted earlier, well below fiscal year 2000 levels. The second major account code is salaries and wages. Given staff reductions over the last 13 years and efforts to bring state employees to market averages, the agency is not proposing cuts in this area. And the third account code, major account code, is contractual services. Of this account code, 81% of expenditures is for statewide services. This includes electronic databases, learning platforms, electronic books that are available to each of your constituents. This also includes the platform utilized to facilitate resource sharing between libraries across the state. The remaining contractual services funding is associated with the other agency programs described in my budget written testimony and general administrative costs. As you consider this proposal, I encourage you to think about the following concerns mentioned in my written proposal. Libraries that rely on state databases as either their core or only databases. This would remove a part of that core. The capacity of libraries to fund these resources out of existing financial resources if they aren't provided by the state. State and federal accreditation requirements for nursing and other programs in higher education institutions across the state. The value of these resources to practicing nurses and medical professionals, genealogists, researchers, and the public. Previous support for the statewide database program from the Board of Regents and the State Library Board. Shifts away from print newspapers and periodicals to electronic access without paywalls. Changing the ratio of federal and state funding for agency services that might impact full eligibility for federal dollars in the future. And the capability of the state to procure these resources at a discount that makes them accessible to all Kansans. If the situation was different and FY 2026 appropriations remain flat from the previous fiscal year, the agency would not recommend cutting the ProQuest contract or reallocating the funding elsewhere. However, significant cuts to the agency's budget over the past 2 decades require us to examine all possibilities. The State Library strongly encourages this committee to adopt the agency's budget as originally proposed and included in the governor's budget. At this time, I will welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, State Librarian Walling. So take me through the first thing you were talking about. Money had been appropriated and now that money is no longer available. So that had to be a tough conversation with the vendor. Tell me about that.
We already paid that vendor.
So is there a problem?
The money's not there, is it?
Well, then how could you pay him?
As I said in my timeline, in this fiscal year, September 30th, 2024, the agency requested delegated authority to purchase the resource. On October 8th of 2024, the agency received approval to move forward with that purchase. And we did so and paid the vendor on October 23rd, 2024. The agency was notified January 12th of 2025 that the funding had been lapsed.
So what exactly does that mean?
It means in the current budget bill, if budget bill is approved and signed by the governor, the funding won't be there.
Okay. So can that be canceled then?
No, we've signed a contract.
Well, if the money's not there, how are you going to address that?
As said we already paid.
We haven't paid in 2025.
It's a one-time expense. It's for a perpetual
Okay.
license.
So I'm not understanding what the problem is. If the money's already been paid, if it's been appropriated and paid, why, help me, I'm sorry.
My understanding is that the clause 86A of House Bill 2007 removes the money that was intended for that purpose.
So was that a one-time expense or not?
Yes, one-time expense.
Okay. Are there other questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a question on the particular payment that you made. You made the payment, that's taken care of. If that funding is not restored, you're going to have to not do something else that's currently in the budget. Is that right?
Correct.
Talk to me a little bit about electronic books. How popular are they?
I believe in my written testimony I provided the number and use of the electronic books. But give me a second to look. That.
Sure.
Documents. So in the budget narrative, it says that there was available to readers 435,910 books. And this past fiscal year, there was checkouts of 964,206 of those books.
So they're pretty popular.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So if you had to cut this budget 7.5%, where would you start?
I provided the proposal I just outlined for that.
Okay, can you tell us about it?
So what we proposed was to cut the ProQuest contract that we currently have, which provides access to the Nursing and Allied Health Premium, US Newsstream, Heritage Quest, and Fold 3, which are available statewide to any Kansan.
Committee, are there other questions? Yes, Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm curious. So you said the ProQuest contract is like $377,000 or $382. So you have 4 total databases. So like, what does Encyclopedia Britannica charge you, or Infobase, or the others? I mean just roughly. I mean, I'm just I didn't realize how much, I don't know, how much a one-year subscription is to some of these databases.
Yeah, and as a reminder, this is for the entire state, for
Right.
all academic institutions,
I
all
got you.
schools, all public libraries, all Kansans. So in fiscal year 26, the EBSCO contract was $727,897. That includes databases like Academic Search Premier, Business Source Premier, and a lot of other resources like Learning Express platform. On Britannica, the total for fiscal year 24 was $184,500 for the license. For Infobase for fiscal year 24, it was $161,573. And that covers all of them with the ProQuest that was already provided.
And if I could follow up just real quick, the 7.5%, just theoretical cut. I mean, the ProQuest was about a 4.8% of your total. Well, I don't quite see where your other cuts, if you had to do it, would come from. I don't,
Yeah, I understand. So the appropriation, in my written testimony,
Okay.
that's all funds. So I'm looking at the entire agency budget
Right.
versus SGF of 7.5%, which is lower.
you.
Yes.
Committee, are there other questions? Representative Howe, I have seen you online. Do you have any questions?
Hey, Vice Chair Sanders, thank you. It wouldn't let me raise my hand online using the little toggle bar here, so I'll just raise my hand like that. Director Walling, on these services that you've identified in your resource reduction proposal, why did you choose those particular ones? Is it based off utilization of those specific platforms?
It is. We compared the full text usage for the last 6 months to the cost of the database for this fiscal year and divided that by 2 since we're only halfway through the fiscal year. And that database the cost was about twice as much per full text use versus the next highest amount. So that was part of the decision, but then we also had to look at our contractual agreements and what was bundled together, what wasn't bundled together, and also just considerations from a collection development standpoint of newspapers or the resources that were available through other resources compared to this particular set of databases.
Now, for that US News, is it US News Wire?
It's US News Stream is the product name, but it does include wire services as one of the some of the resources that are in there in addition to the newspapers listed in the written testimony.
Okay. So, what does that entail? Could you describe to me a little bit more about what access or what publications are made available through that service? And since we're talking about utilization, can you give us some idea of how many people were utilizing that? And also, while I'm at it, is that a service the legislature uses?
Sure. So let me go back to my document here. In the description, it mentions that it provides access to the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, over 680 Gannett regional newspapers, and hundreds of other U.S. newspapers. The content, depending on the publication, can go as far back as 1980, and in many cases, the latest edition is added the day it's actually published. So that is an overview of the actual resource. We don't know the number of people necessarily. We can find the number of sessions, the number of full text uses, the number of searches for that database, but I don't have those on me at the moment, but I can get them if you would like. And then the other aspect for the legislature does have access to this particular collection, but it also has access to a product called Newsbank. And one of the reasons that we have to get Newsbank separately is that the McClatchy papers, which a number of papers in Kansas are McClatchy papers, there is a deal with Newsbank that they are the only ones that are able to provide access to those publications.
Okay. So McClatchy would be like Kansas City Star, Wichita Eagle, and I think
Yes.
those. Okay.
And Topeka Capital Journal, I think, might be in that too.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And what is the total amount, dollar amount for those? If you were to eliminate those future contracts or those contract services, how much was that again?
$382,976.98 in fiscal year 26, and theoretically we go up each year for inflation purposes, but.
Okay. And you mentioned when we talked earlier about you've set aside, I think, $83,000 for a new website.
Yes.
Now, is that just for website design, website maintenance and hosting, the whole thing, or?
It's the whole
Is it
thing.
also to help other aspects of the state library system?
So it's for the whole thing. It's for the state library's website to create the website, have a content management system, have the vendor migrate the data from the old website to the new website, including usability testing, user experience testing, and then hosting the service in the long term.
Okay, you said the RFP process was initiated last fall. When's the last time you've heard back from them on where you're at in the process?
Due to the requirements of statute, the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, has to sign off on the RFP document before it can be published. It is in the CISO's office now and has been there for some time.
Okay, did they give you any indication of when they would make a determination?
No.
Do you know if that has been put on hold due to the budget cycle?
I do not believe so. My understanding from the Office of Procurement and Contracts is that we do need to do a new RFP to be in compliance with statute.
Okay, so that RFP, a new RFP needs to start
As soon
altogether?
as possible. As soon as possible,
Okay.
yes.
So do you think the $83,000 would need to be carried over into fiscal year 26?
Potentially. It's hard to tell at this
Okay.
point. We're getting to a point where it's getting a little late.
Okay. Thank you, Director Walling. Thank you, Vice Chair Sanders.
Welcome.
Thank you, Representative Howe. We're going to get to Representative Fairchild in a moment, but I wanted to ask about the newspapers. So how many different newspapers does the state library subscribe to?
That's a little more complicated because there's resources that we subscribe to for state employees and elected officials, and there are resources that we buy for all Kansans. So this newspaper database that I'm referencing as something to cut is something we provide to all Kansans. We have the news banks collection that's specifically for legislators, and we subscribe to print publications in some cases because of legislator preferences. I can try to find a complete.
I mean, can you give me an approximate number?
I do not know off the top of my head. I don't wanna
Okay.
mislead you.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of redundancy there. I mean, a lot of those newspapers are served by Associated Press.
Well, in this case, there are two different vendors and have two different purposes. Really, the latter database is getting McClatchy papers and papers that are specific to Kansas that aren't available in this other resource.
Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you look at the agency request for 2025, which is 7,353,638, and then is that number the number that the legislature passed in our budget last year? That agency request, is that the budget we passed, and then in this current year, in the legislative budget committee then came back and recommended a number that was about 150,000 lower in that? Is that what happened?
I don't believe so. The 150,000 was a reappropriation from fiscal year 24 to 25. So it wouldn't have been in last year's budget. It's money that's carried over from the previous fiscal year to the current fiscal year. And I'd ask Jennifer to correct me if I'm incorrect on that.
Jennifer?
So the 2024 legislature approved $7.4 million for the state library. The agency came in with a request of let me say it this way. The legislature approved $7,420,000 worth of money for the state library. The agency's request is $7,353,638. And then the Special Committee on Legislative Budget recommended a budget of 7.2 million.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the testimony, Director Wallings. Circling back to ProQuest, And I believe I know the answer because you and I have had this conversation, but maybe for the benefit of the committee, how many institutions of learning, higher ed, post-secondary, also utilize ProQuest in classes and in their searches?
In Kansas,
Mm.
I would believe everyone would. These are statewide resources.
Okay, so we also want to look at this as an investment into making sure that the open sources that you're providing are available to students and that these are utilized in college classes. I utilize them myself, and it is a benefit. So I'd hate to see us cut that. So thank you.
Are there other questions? Representative Wagner.
One quick question, and just looking at your track record on your history of your budget, I'm a little puzzled as to why you would go after ProQuest and not, this aid to local units was like literally has jumped multiple times here, and you guys are proposing it further. I mean, don't local libraries, I know in Reno County, the Hutchinson Library has its own taxing authority. I mean, it has, as far as aid to local units, I mean, that does provide something the local units, if they had the real need for, could make up from their own tax source. Is that not correct?
If they are able to tax their communities at a more significant rate, that is possible through ad valorem tax and managing revenue neutral fund hearings and all of those things, it could be possible. What I would say is the funding for libraries and the way library statute originally started in the 50s allowed for funding. Then the regional systems were created in the 60s and provided additional support for those libraries. And it was in the 70s that the state aid was added. So there must have been some thought at the time that that money wasn't just enough, what was being provided at the local level, the regional level, that some additional money be provided at the state level. In regards to your timing, the sequence of timing of this, the only increase we've received in, I believe, the last 2 decades was last year for state aid. The number has consistently gone down from 2000 to fiscal year 2024. So for the last several years, from before 2024 fiscal year, the amount held steady at $1,067,914. So as I mentioned in my testimony, it was up at 2.8 million in 2000, and that doesn't consider inflation over the past amount of time and the spending power of that funding that has decreased.
All right, last call for this conferee. Any other questions? State Librarian Walling, I know that I've been in situations where I've testified and just as soon as I sit down, I wish I had said whatever. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
Not at the moment. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to follow up on any of the questions you had specifically, because I didn't have complete answers for some of those?
Okay, very good. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on to our next presentation. We call Jennifer Light back to the podium from the Legislative Research Department, and we're going to get into the Kansas Historical Society budget. Jennifer.
Thank you. Patrick Zollner, the Executive Director, and Matthew Chappell, Director of Administration, are in the audience behind me. Again, my name's Jennifer. Lovely to see you for the second time this afternoon. The Kansas State Historical Society identifies, collects, and preserves materials and information about the state's founding, as well as the Kansas history in general. We're going to start our analysis on page 2. The agency's revised request includes $13.1 million, including $9.8 million SGF and 83 FTE positions. This is an increase of $1.4 million or 11.9% from the approved amount. The Special Committee on the Legislative Budget approved a budget of $11.9 million, or recommended a budget of $11.9 million, including $8.6 million SGF with 74.5 FTE. Bottom of page 2 begins the analysis. The agency carried over just under $238,000 in unspent SGF monies from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25 due to unfinished work on the roofs at the Shawnee Indian Mission Historical Site. The project is expected to be finished in 25, and the reappropriated money will be spent on that capital improvements project. Items 2 through 6 are supplemental enhancements and were not recommended by the special committee on the legislative budget, but I'm going to go over them just so you have an idea of what the agency was asking for. The agency is requesting 905,000 SGF for interior wall infrastructure within the gallery of the Kansas Museum of History, associated engineering costs, and the update to life safety systems required by that new infrastructure in fiscal year 25. And this needed infrastructure is not within the scope of the contractor who is responsible for the design and development of the individual exhibits. Item number 3 is to open Kansas Museum of History. The agency is requesting four FTE positions, 8 temporary positions, and they're requesting just over $96,000, including just over $78,000 SGF along with that. The 4 FTE positions will be for 2 custodial specialists, 1 visitor service representative supervisor, and 1 third-party coordinator for space rentals. The item number 4 is to open Curtis House. The agency is requesting just over $58,000 SGF and 1.5 FTE positions to open the Curtis House in Topeka as a state historic site in fiscal year 2025. The agency is in the process of purchasing the house now and for the museum. It is my understanding that that is very close to being finalized. $300,000 was approved last year by the 2024 legislature for that purpose. So this is not to do with the purchase of Curtis House. This is solely to open Curtis House. Item number 5 at the bottom, page 3, is capital tour guides and elevator attendants. The agency is requesting just over 85,000 SGF and the transfer of 2 non-FTE unclassified permanent positions for the management of the cage elevators in the state capitol building. The agency indicates that these FTE positions were currently in the Department of Administration. They'd be moving to the Historical Society because they have it makes more sense within the flow of where the FTE positions would be. Top of page 4, the agency is requesting just under $73,500 and $1,000 SGF and 1 FTE position for a management systems analyst. The management systems analyst will manage the current 4 FTE positions within the IT department and also focus on the IT security and production of state electronic records. Item number 7 begins outside the supplemental requests. So this is outside of the supplemental requests for the year. The agency's revised estimate includes an increase of just over $169,000 in the Federal Historic Preservation Grants and Aids Fund. This is pass-through money from the federal government to local governments and organizations to help prepare preservation plans and projects and engage in education activities that help preserve historic buildings. All other adjustments, the agency's revised estimate includes an increase of just over $10,000, all in special revenue funds for all other adjustments. I'd be happy to stand for questions on 2025 or move on to 26.
Does anybody have a question about 2025? Hearing none, you may continue, Jennifer.
Top of page 5 begins fiscal year 2026. The agency's request for 26 is $10.4 million, including $6.7 million SGF and 84 FTE positions. The Special Committee on Legislative Budget recommended a budget of $8.9 million, including $5.4 million SGF and 74.5 FTE positions. They did not include any of the enhancement requests. Bottom of page 5 begins the analysis. Items 1 through 9 are the enhancement requests. I do want to point out that the first several items may sound like repeats from fiscal year 2025. If you think about it this way, fiscal year 2025, they're asking for a partial year amount, and in fiscal year 26, they're asking for a full year amount. So they're asking for just under $353,000, including just under $296,000 SGF for staffing at the Kansas Museum of History. This would be the same 4 FTE, not 4 FTE on top of their request in 25. It's the same 4 FTE and the 8 temporary positions. To open Curtis House, the full year request that they're asking for is just over $103,500. Again, this is the same 1.5 FTE. It would not be on top of. So at the end of fiscal year 26, it would not be 3 FTE. It would just be the 1.5 that they are requesting to open the Curtis House in Topeka as a state historic site in fiscal year 26. The IT restructure is just under $92,400 in fiscal year 26, and it's the same 1.0 FTE positions. And the capital tour guides is just under 86,300, and the same 2 non-FTE unclassified permanent positions. Starting on the top of page 7 is the new enhancements request for fiscal year 2026 that you've not heard in fiscal year 25. It begins with the mobile shelving unit repair. The agency is requesting $302,500 SGF to do a system conversion of the mobile library records shelving system in the Center for Historic Research. You may recall that last year there was a request for a mobile shelving unit that was for the archaeological records. This is for the main mobile shelving unit in the Center for Historic Research. Item number 6, the agency is requesting an additional $250,000 SGF for a total of $625,000 SGF for emergency repairs and services for capital improvements. The agency indicates that this request is due to the continued high inflationary costs for materials and services. Item number 7, middle of the page, is for Grinter Place ADA compliant and visitor parking. The agency is requesting just over $203,000, including just over $128,000 SGF to replace the ADA compliant parking area at Grinter Place Historic Site, which is located in Kansas City. Bottom of page 7 is Grinter Place again. They're asking to reopen Grinter Place year-round. So they're requesting just under $62,000 and 1 FTE position to transition back to being open full-time. And the 1 position would be for a historic sites curator. Top of page 8, the agency is requesting $10,000 SGF for Humanities Kansas to support statewide resources for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The agency, Humanities Kansas, has indicated that they would be printing life-size copies of the Declaration of Independence on double-sided banners, and that they'd be in public spaces across the state, such as public libraries, local museums, and other cultural organizations. Outside the enhancements request, the agency's fiscal year 2026 request includes a decrease of $2.9 million, including 3.1 million SGF for capital improvements. This is due to the capital improvements they are anticipating to be finished in fiscal year 2025, so they will not need the money for them in fiscal year 2026. And all other adjustments includes an increase of just over $373,000, including just under $38,000 SGF for all other adjustments. This includes increases in salaries and wages and contractual services, which is offset by decreases in aid to locals. The SGF is all in the salaries and wages and is mainly for group health insurance. And the aid to locals is in federal funding. I'd be happy to stand for questions or cover capital improvements if you would like.
Does anybody have any questions for Jennifer at this point? So I have one. Tell me about this shelving. $300,000 seems like a big ticket for shelving. What's special about this shelving?
So the shelving is not just standard on the wall, doesn't move shelving. It's the mobile where it expands and contracts. And so it's on my understanding is that it's on some version of a system which would open and shut so that they can have more storage in that area. And the current system has reached its service limit and is failing frequently, so they aren't able to access records for people when they come in and ask for them from the historic site, the Historical Society. So they're wanting to disassemble the current system and convert to the new system with this money.
I guess we'll get more clarification from Mr. Zoller when it's his turn, but how does a shelf fail?
To my understanding, it's not that the shelf itself is failing, it's that the mechanism to move it. So right now, it's got it where the shelves would be really close on one side and they're all pushed together. And then there's a tract that you can wheel and those shelves would expand out so you could walk between them and be able to get into them.
Okay.
And that mechanism is what's failing, not the shelves themselves, but the mechanism that's being able to help allow them to store more in a smaller section.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to get out of your pay grade, but we'll have further comments about that from Mr. Zoller, I'm sure. All right, any other questions? All right, how about you move on?
Okay, I just want to touch briefly on the capital improvements. The Joint Committee on State Building Construction did meet today over lunch, but I do not believe they ended up having any recommendations at the end of it. As soon as they have recommendations, I will be happy to get that to the committee. On page 9, you can see the capital budget and debt, which is the capital improvements section. Overall, most of what is here we have already covered in the fiscal year 25-26. I do want to point out that items 2 through 4 were the items for the Kansas Museum of History, AHU and Chillers, the Curtis House purchase, and the Shawnee Indian Mission roof replacement for fiscal year 25 were approved by the 2024 legislative session. Item number 5 in fiscal year 2025, we've already discussed, that's the interior walls at the Kansas Museum of History. Red Rock's White's house repairs is $100,000, all from federal funds for repairs to windows, wood trim frames, and parts of the porch on William Allen White's house. The middle of page 10 is fiscal year 2026 improvements. Again, some of this we've touched on, the emergency rehab and repair increase, the mobile shelving. Mardazine at the bottom of page 10 is $200,000, all from private donations for the first year in a multi-year project at the Mardazine Massacre State Historic Site to restore utilities, landscape, the Hadskill House Visitor Center, and narrative features along the paths. And then item number 4 we also discussed is the Grinter Place ADA compliant and visitor parking. Page 12 is reference tables, and page 13 and 14 covers the Heritage Trust Fund grants more in depth. And with that, I am happy to stand for questions on anything within the budget summary document.
Committee, are there questions? Chairman Howe?
I don't have any questions, Vice Chair Sanders.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer. Nice job. All right. We now welcome to the podium the Historical Society Executive Director, Patrick Zollner. Good afternoon, Patrick. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sanders, and thank you, Jennifer, for that great summary. I do have a submitted written testimony, but I have a PowerPoint that I think will be helpful just to hit the high points and hopefully not be too boring.
All right. Well, let's get that fired up and away we go.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is the Kansas State Historical Society. We were founded in 1875, and this year is our 150th anniversary. We're pretty excited about that. It shows you a bit, you can see a photo of our campus out just west of Wanamaker, where we have our main office and the historic Potawatomi mission on about 80 acres. Today, though, we do own 56 buildings, 5 monuments, 6 structures, and a combined 600 acres of land that we're responsible for. Again, we were founded in 1875 by the Kansas newspaper editors and publishers. The next year, let's see, where am I supposed to? Some other tidbits. At 1879 is when we became a trustee of the state. 1905, there were official state archives or repositories for government records. And we're a little different from the state library that we just heard. Okay, I think it's a couple too many. All right. So by the next year, though, we were in this building. We were in a small room with all of the records right there, as you can see it, in the small room above the northwest staircase. And we were here in the State House. This is when we had their museum. It was just right out there in the hall. And by 1893, the legislature had given us 3 rooms in the south wing. So we outgrew that. And so the memorial building, which we're not in anymore, was built and started in 1911. We had President Taft dedicate the cornerstone. It was paid for mainly by a $90,000 Civil War claim from the federal government and a state appropriation. So there's some fun construction photos. There it is again. They were moving actually the battle flag collection in this photo from the State House. But we outgrew that building as well. And in 1981, ground was broken on our new facility, which was actually purchased in 73 or the early 70s. And so we began where our current facility, the museum. We see in 1983, the Cyrus K. Holiday locomotive had to lay rails to back it in there. And we had to transfer many of our collections from the Memorial Building out of the skylight. So there you see I think that's the Thomas Flyer, but one of our cars. And so, so now we're looking at revamping since the museum opened in 1984 in phases. And here's some of our program numbers that we've shared with you, in the same format over the years. And it's basically based on digital resources, digital touches, page previews, 21.6 million of those up over last year. I did want to get to something a little more tangible and dive in on our visitation, actual in-person. Here in this building, our Capitol Dome tours remain very popular, as does the historic tours. We served over 38,000 visitors last year. And then at the sites, I got ahead of myself here. The 16 state historic sites, total of 24,509 visitors. Fort Hays State led the way, just over 6,000. It's just up 12% over last year. And the year-round sites, which we did open Mission State Historic Site in September of 2023, was up 30%. So again, as mentioned earlier, all of our sites were open year-round, and then beginning in 2008 over the years, they all were gradually made seasonal, except for Fort Hays and Constitution Hall. We brought back Mission, and as you'll see later, we wanted to do that with Grinter Place as well. We mentioned some grants in Jennifer's testimony. The Heritage Trust Fund is one of our most popular grant programs. It was created by the legislature in 1990, and it's paid for by a per-page recordation for real estate transfer. 1.2 million was awarded this past year to 15 properties, and you can see there they're distributed statewide. Properties have to be on the state or national register of historic places. Another one, this was a one-time grant. We previously had received another $500,000 a couple of years ago that we told you about from the National Park Service called the Paul Brune Grant Award. This time we got $750,000, and in August we awarded all of the money. We didn't keep any for overhead to 8 projects in rural Kansas. This is the money mentioned that is our federal money. This is a portion of our money that we get to operate the State Historic Preservation Office. It's passed through to communities to assist with their survey and listing processes and other things. So we had bricks and mortar, and this is kind of paper grant, but this was $92,000 to 7 applicants. And then the big one is the historic tax credits. Both we administer the federal program, the state program. Was created in 2001 and has really been phenomenal in helping historic buildings be converted to new uses. We have high schools converted to apartments, et cetera. So for fiscal year 2024, we use an economic software that the National Center for Preservation and Technology provides. There was a $60.5 million investment in state, creation of over 1,000 jobs, and then all the other big numbers. I'm not totally sure what gross state product is, but that's a pretty big number. So that's one. We had over 117 projects properties complete state tax credit projects last year. One of the things that we've remarked on from years from we have many, but of our more popular outreach programs is the Kansas Archaeological Training Program. Last year it was held in actually 2 adjoining counties, Crawford and Bourbon County. We had both a prehistoric site and a territorial site, and it reached 83 participants, and we had a total donation of 2,383 hours of volunteer work towards recording our archaeological heritage. Moving on and mentioning some of our enhancements, I believe we shared this image last year of the new thematic gallery that the museum will be. The next image shows the wall structures that are needed. That was not originally part of the project, but it's significant, including the center section and ramp and viewing area. So this shows you how the new museum gallery will be laid out. This is, as mentioned, the construction is underway to stay on time as much as we could on our time schedule. We were delayed from my announcement last year. We're still going to open it by the end of the year. We're looking at fall at this time. It's all dependent on when these get done. Then the contractor installs the exhibits, and then our staff installs the artifacts. So it's a kind of a three-phase approach. But here's some shots showing the construction of the interior gallery walls. The particular photo here is pretty interesting. You can see our Longren Flyer, which is one of our star attractions, 1914. But to the right is, I mentioned on a past testimony, we had some over 4,000 artifacts on display out of 120,000 in our collection. Well, the photo on your right is the fire door into the collection storage area. If you ever get a chance to visit that, it's pretty amazing. We welcome you to come by anytime. We'll give you a tour. Our staff came up with a really clever idea, and we did this ourselves. We're working on it to have a viewing window that when it's finished, we'll be able to open the door, stage large items, things that can't go out on display, so we can keep a moving thing. So we're pretty excited about that aspect. This is will be the new museum gift shop, which is run by the Kansas Historical Foundation, our sister kind of nonprofit agency that also runs the Capitol Visitor Store here. And I mentioned the Curtis House. Here's just a couple of pretty photos. We have signed the contract on our end, so it is getting closer. We're still having to determine how to get that abstract of title, which the statute requires. Again, this was a statute authorized in 1986, and this past year, the legislature authorized the funds to purchase it. The state archives, so we're getting to those mobile shelving. So here's a picture of our reading room. We had 1,300 researchers visit last year to do research. A lot of it looks kind of like that Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark to the right, and that is fixed shelving. But this is the mobile shelving. There's over 4,500 square feet. And I hate that, and someone can correct me, the multiplier, but it allows us to store, I don't know how many times, like 4 or 5 times the number of what fixed shelving would be. The archaeology shelving that was mentioned that was replaced last year, the length of the shelves was shorter. We were able to change that to a manual crank operation. The length of this precludes it. It's too long for manual. And of course, this was opened in 1994. And so what was state of the art in 94 with these electronic controls, you can see the green buttons there, and the motors were proprietary. They can't be upgraded anymore. They don't make the parts for them. So the bid, why it's so expensive, they have to gut those motors and the electronic controls for the new one. So what happens if you want something and it's not on that row open and it fails? You're kind of out of luck. We do have a battery pack system, kind of like a jumper cables. You go plug it in and that usually works, but it's at end of life. So yes, it's a big number to me, Vice Chair, too, but we did get several estimates, and that's the best one we've got. This is the Grinner Place State Historic Site. It's in the greater Kansas City. It's in Wyandotte County, but it was the last of our sites that went seasonal because of its location and its potential. This is the one we would like to open back up to year-round to be able to, again, to reach more people. So that's an 1857 house. It was a historic ferry crossing on the Frontier Road, the Fort Scott to Fort Leavenworth Road. This is, and then I did pick the worst shot of the parking lot, of course, but the good part's not much better. Basically, the pavement is just kind of turning to gravel. We are going to reduce the size of the existing parking lot somewhat for the new one, but that's what we're stuck with. Just want to mention, we produce a bi-monthly newsletter to let Kansans and you and constituents know what the work that we're doing, what grants that we have available, and the status of the museum gallery opening. So if you're not, I hope you enjoy that. And finally, I want to conclude. I didn't want to dwell on this, but I'll blame Ray because he brought it up first. But it is true, our funding over the years has been a steady decline. And while it does, we are asking for enhancements, and it is a lot of money. It is still less than what we received in 2007, and the discrepancy in FTEs is even greater. So we're trying to get back to all the programs to affect Kansans and preserve history. So I appreciate your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Executive Director Zollner. Committee, are there questions? Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zollner, the $905,000 wall, I noticed that the drawings that you had in your presentation here, somewhere back through here, was this a change that you all came up with for display purposes?
Well, that's a great question. When Jenny passed away, my predecessor, Jenny Chan, we were under contract with DI. There were actually 3 contracts, and if we could rewind the clock, we would have 1. Once the concepts were finalized and the exhibits, that's when in May we found out this is just what we're doing. You have to do the infrastructure. It's your building. We think that probably initially it was going to be thought to be more of an open plan. And our own crew has done amazing work. We disassembled all the other exhibits. We thought maybe we could build it. The extent of this, and you saw the metal studs, was beyond our ability. So we didn't find out till May. So yes.
So is this new wall, is it structural?
It's structural.
Load bearing, I guess.
It's not load bearing for the building, but it's required to hang the exhibits on. They're not freestanding. That's the reason they have to be there, to hold the new exhibits.
Without this, let's say that it's decided not to spend the money there, what happens?
We have, and we did meet with Secretary Profit in June to look at options and to see if there was turn back grant funds or ARPA or something, to see if there was any alternatives, which there was not, but encouraged us to continue to stay on track. And so the initial cost we have fronted out of some general fee funds. Now, if we do not get the 905,000, it will have an impact on other contracts and even some staff salaries that are paid for out of that general fee fund, but we started the process and fronted it with it. But unless we finish, we can't open the museum gallery. So we kind of stuck finishing that wall one way or another.
Representative Amix.
Without this wall, you can't open? Well, I guess that answered that question.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to contradict you, but I'm a bit puzzled by that. Do you have to put everything out at once?
No, that is our goal. From experience in '84, when the exhibits were opened and phased, it wasn't received as well. People were disappointed initially, only seeing a portion of the museum gallery open. Now, our facility as a whole, I do want to correct, is open. Our offices are open. The state archives are open. We will bring online in March one of the classrooms. Our museum after hours is one of our outreach programs, and it's one of the things we're doing to commemorate our 150th anniversary. It will have hybrid capability once the lobby is done in the event. So we're going to do things there, but for the gallery itself, for it to mean anything and for it to work, it needs to be open altogether.
Well, I know that I've seen other museums where they only display part of their inventory at one time. Why can't you do that?
And we will only have part of it there. The thing is, we tell the state's entire history. We're the one entity tasked with doing that. So we tell the whole story, and we would have to stop somewhere. I mean, we will look at all, we will make things work. I pledge you, but our plan, our goal to do this is to open everything together. So.
Are there other questions from the committee? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your agency request is quite a bit more than the Legislative Budget Committee request, but yet it's still quite a bit less than what you requested in 2025, 13.1 million in 25 and 10.3 million. Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems a little unusual for an agency to request that much less than what you had previously. What's the reason for that?
The main part of that, if you'll recall from last year, was that $2.7 million chiller and air handling unit. So that was another one that I would rather not had to have bought if I didn't have to, but so that's the main reason.
So to follow up on that, is that done?
We're under contract. We're working on it. The old chiller's out in the parking lot. I saw it the other day. So yes, they're working on it now.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Yes, Representative Haskins. Oh, Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a side question. I don't exactly see it referenced here, but of course, the main museum has been closed, you know, and it's being renovated, but how far off until something's going to reopen? I mean, what's the plan?
That's this, what I've been showing you here. That's the main museum. And it closed in September of 2022. A year ago, from our contractor, we were going to open about now, but that's pushed out to the fall. They haven't given us a specific date. It's keyed on when those walls are finished, so then they can start installing their exhibits.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your testimony on that. Let's circling back to that 905,000 for that infrastructure wall. You mentioned that if it doesn't come from SGF, that it will come from the general fee fund. And I'm curious what type of breakdown, if you only got partial of that, what impact would that have? You made general say like, well, certain people might not get pay raises and stuff. So
We would the short answer is we haven't planned for that because some of that was a little bit because our fee funds was a reserve, but a lot of it again is tied with grants. So we'll have to make decisions and priorities if we don't get that to make it work. But with our normal budget, we can cover that, you know. So
without going
ahead.
too far off the rails, can you give me an example as far as like what would be something that you would have to sacrifice?
I mean, we have some positions tied to it. We might have to shift some balance of funding from one type. And we have multiple fee funds too. This was our general one. So yeah, we can do some crunching and get you a better answer. But today, right now, I can't tell you without knowing.
Thank you.
Committee? Chairman Howe, do you have questions?
Hi, Vice Chair Sanders. Yeah, I did for Director. So if the wall's under construction, who has authorized that construction? Was it approved by the state, the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, or the budget director himself? Or could you tell me about why that's already underway, even though you don't have the funding?
Yes. Again, we did meet with Secretary Profit, the budget director, and he advised us that we could start if we had general fee funds to at least front the cost and cover it. So the plans have been approved by facilities downtown, but we did not go before the Joint Building Committee.
Representative Howe? I think we may have lost Representative.
Yeah, thank you for that, Director. Also, in the, you had mentioned some need for IT position, someone to manage the IT team that you have. Could you give a little bit more indication about why that is? And also, do you have any flexibility of whether or not you can go from 4 people on your IT team to 3, then backfill it with a management position?
Yes, certainly. The request was based upon a recent audit finding that showed some deficiencies, some areas that we needed to improve. It was, we've determined that position would enable us to best address our IT security concerns. We have had an applications development position that has been vacant for several years. So we're already working one shy. If we did not receive this, we can continue. We have to do some reorganization and reevaluate how we're going to. We've already started to address a lot of those things, but there's so many scary stories out there. We want to make sure we're doing everything possible to have secure websites and secure IT.
Thank you for that. And my last question is, what is the single most important thing or part of this budget request for the Kansas State Historical Society? If you could just single out one thing,
If it's the one
what
thing,
would
it's
that
the, thank you, sir. If it's one thing, it is the wall, because we need to get that completed so we can open the gallery.
Okay, thank you.
All right, committee, any other questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you ever receive any private funding or any private donations from anyone? And if you do, would it be possible just to ask people to privately donate money to finish the wall?
That's an excellent question, and I failed to mention in my presentation, because I've done it so much over the years, that the museum gallery, all those new exhibits are funded with privately raised dollars. $6 million for the gallery, a total of 6.45 when you include the improvements to the lobby and the plaza. We did go to the foundation when we saw this shortage on the wall, and they said basically they were tapped out. This fundraising effort began in 2015 when $6 million went a lot farther than it does now. And we basically had capital campaign fatigue. That's not to say that we can't and we will not be seeking private funds for other operations and things in the future. But for the here and the now, after we met, at the time it was the interim executive director at the foundation was John Pennegar, and we looked at all of our options, and this was what we came to.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you, Executive Director Zoller. Appreciate your time this afternoon. Okay, we have about 12 minutes. Let's take a look at the handout that you got at the beginning of the meeting, the House Higher Ed Budget Committee rules. Brianna, are there any things that are significantly different about these rules than the rules that any other committees have?
Mr. Chair Committee, I did not work on these. Jill Walters did. So to my understanding, there has been no significant changes from the rules that we had last year.
Okay, very good. Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't see anything wrong with the rules. I just had an idea as far as how we vote on bills or how we vote on amendments. However, I'm not going to bring that up right now. I was corresponding with Representative Howe, and he wanted to talk to me about that first, and he's the committee chairman, and the committee chairman is responsible for writing the rules, and so I'm going to discuss that with him and have a conversation and see what we can come up with.
All right. Well, I think the purpose of getting the rules today was just to make the committee aware of what the rules were, and Representative Fairchild, when you're comfortable, we'll look forward to your potential amendment. Is there anything else to come before the Higher Ed Budget Committee today? Seeing none, we are adjourned.